when I left Baba in 1952, after we had, after I had met him, I was really and truly off balance. I was way off. As Miss Krask put it, he knocked you off your perch, and he certainly did. And I was a very, very disciplined dancer. I can tell you. If you want to make a living at it, you have to keep your mouth shut, and that kind of thing. And anyway, I went back, and I had had a contract. I went right back and went into rehearsal for a summer job at Jones Beach. And there was a production of A Night in Venice, a huge, extravaganza thing that we performed on a man-made island. And there was huge bleachers. And we had mermaids, and they swam out and things like that. One night, Venus, there was an island between our island and the stage, and the bleachers, and this island came up, and Venus was sitting in a shell, and the mermaids had ropes, and they swam from the shore underwater on these ropes and appeared as her court, and then they had a water ballet and things like that. Well, one night something happened, waiting, because they knew that the island was not moving, and suddenly it started, and it didn't rise out of the waves. It was throwing. It was like Cape Canaveral, and there was Venus. Because they all had to hold their breath the whole time. And another time, and we're on stage, we're doing other things, and we hear all these cries, and all these cries coming from the lagoon, and we looked out across the lagoon, and there was like silver dollars all over the place. A whole swarm of jellyfish. And these poor women with their water ballet, they were just stuck with this. That's showbiz. But anyway, I went back for rehearsal for that, and I just could not concentrate. I didn't remember what the choreographer had set the day before, and people really didn't know what was wrong with me. And I brought a tablet, a big legal, yellow lined tablet, unlined tablet, foolscap or something they call that. And every break, I would just write Baba's name in columns. You can write an awful lot of Babas in columns on those pages. And that's what I did to try to keep my concentration. And Miss Krask was back by then, and I guess Baba had gone on wherever he went. I don't remember or know. And I talked to her about it, and she said, well, why don't you make him something? And I said, oh, well, that's an idea. And she said, he'll probably give it away, but you can make it and try to give it to him sometime. Because we thought that was finished, that we didn't know that actually I saw Bob again exactly 2 months after the first time, because he had had the accident in Prague and so forth and so on. But this story is about what I made for him. And I started out and I said, now, what shall I make for him? So I thought I had a beautiful block of walnut that I'm a sort of a artsy craftsy type, and I carved, and I said, I'll make him a box. So I started carving this box with a lizard crawling over it and everything. And I got it, this poor lizard halfway done, and I said, what am I wasting my time? What is Baba going to put in this box? And I rethought it, and I said, no, I'll make him a jacket. So fabric was much better in those days. You could find if you splurged, you could find wonderful weaves from England and so forth. So I found a beautiful white gabardine, a woolen gabardine, nice and light and smooth and beautiful. And I asked Miss Krask, I said, because, when I met Baba, he could have been 14 feet tall or a midget. I just didn't know. I was so staggered by him that he could have been anything. And I said to her, I said, what size is he? And she said, he's about your size. And it was true. We were. So I made this coat. And in those days, the Nehru collar was very popular. So I made it with his, and I didn't particularly care for the Indian style. They never just draped a jacket, they always tucked it in at the waist, and Baba was getting a little older with a tummy, and I said, straight. Anyway. So my dad was a very good tailor, and my mother was a very good seamstress. So I grew up with it. Nobody taught me. I just grew up with it, and I can tailor and that kind of thing. So it came out okay, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then suddenly, in July, Baba had been at Harmon-on-Hudson, and then he went on down to Myrtle Beach, and he had been recuperating at Yukon Dunes, and we had gotten messages. No one was to contact him that whole time after the accident. It was, off limits. And so we just all got secondhand information. But then we got news that he was going to go through New York on his way, I think, to England. I'm not sure. But he was going to be in New York, and we could see him one day. I think it was July 17th. I'm not sure at all, but I think it was. And Ivy Deuce had an apartment at Des Artistes on West 66th Street, is it? I don't know, 68. A beautiful, fabulous old building with incredible apartments in it. And so we were going to see him there. And I had finished the coat, and I just couldn't wait to see him because, the first time I saw him, he turned me completely around and rolled me over several times. But I was waiting for a second shot and eagerly. And it was a dreadfully hot, humid day. And as I told you, Baba was so beautiful the first time. And I just couldn't wait to see him again. And I got to the door of the room, and Miss Krask was standing there, and all of her 5-foot severity, 5'2", and she said, "You're not to ask any questions, and you're not to do this or that or the other." And that, in my memory, was all the time. And some people I won't say they complained about it, but they wanted to ask him questions. And I thought, what question do I have to ask Baba? And I ended up with, I don't have any questions anyway. What am I going to ask him? Okay. And I walked into the room, and it was like someone punched me in the face, because I had seen this magical creature before. But on the bed, lying on the bed in a cast from ankle to hip, and from, I believe it was his left arm, was in a cast, and it was hot, 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 and humid, and Baba's hair was down again, but it was stringy because he was perspiring. I saw this man lying on the bed. He was rather gray, his color, pallor, not at all the magical creature I had seen before. And later on, in later years, I was rather grateful, and that was a terrible shock to me. I can't tell you or describe it. I was rather grateful that he did that, because I don't know if it's true or not, but I figured it out that I saw Baba every time in a very, very different way. And Baba was about 4 million people. And I saw him, and each vision was wondrous, but they were very, very different faces and types. Anyway, I was just standing there, and I just dropped the little box that I had the coat in at the foot of the bed. I don't know if he hit anything or not. And Baba didn't show any particular pleasure at seeing me, but he motioned me to come, and he said, sit down on the bed. So if Baba is lying on the bed, if this is the bed, and he was lying this way, he patted and I sat so that I was sitting this way, looking at Baba, twisted. And he didn't say anything. I just sat there and looked at him and was kind of trying to adjust. And he took my, which hand was it? Anyway, he took one of my hands. I used to remember this very carefully. Anyway, and he pressed, with his hands, he pressed it against his chest. And he looked out the window the other way. And Baba had amazing strength. I encountered that more than once. I don't say it hurt, but he pressed my hand into his chest. And for quite some time, I was completely and totally bewildered. And then he turned and he took a grape, and he said, open your mouth. He didn't say that, but that's what and I took it, and I held it between my teeth. And he gave me a rather severe look, and I bit it. And when I bit it, he said, leave. And that was that meeting. Very, very different. Okay. Now, I had left the coat. I didn't know what happened to it or care, because he had knocked me off from 2 months of, floating on some kind of peak cloud up there. He had knocked me right off the cloud and thrown me into a basement. And it's very amusing that it wasn't particularly comfortable on that cloud, but you're not going to get off. But you're not going to stay in the basement. You're going to claw your way out, which I did. And it was a strange kind of elation depression, strange and unique. And that was that. Oh, he was in Scarsdale? Anyway, that's where he was. He wasn't in New York. And very early, like 6:30 in the morning, I'm not an early riser, by the way. 11 o'clock is sort of my time. Anyway, but my phone rang, and I answered it, and it was Miss Crask. I knew it was Miss Crask, but she had a voice that I hardly recognized the tone. It was very, very severe, I guess. And she said, "I have a message for you." Well, my heart stopped right there because I knew, of course, it was from Baba. And she said, and this is verbatim. I don't remember anything except this one is verbatim. She said, "Baba told me to tell you that you have put your head into a noose." And that when Baba needs a new coat, you are to make it, but you are not to work on it until he tells you to. And that was the message. And that was 1952 still. Okay, time passes, doesn't it? And so I had a big story of why I didn't get to go to India. For the, quote, 3 incredible weeks that men, the men's Sahavas. I didn't get to do that. And so 1956 rolls around, and Baba plans, we have the plan. That was the plan before. The Sufis arranged everything on that trip to America. When Baba arrived, the Sufis took over, and Baba had said we could travel with him if we had the money. But again, you couldn't borrow it. You had to have it. And I had, of course, saved and stashed away because Miss Crask said he's going to ask for money from time to time, so you have to save it and you have to have it. And I said, "Yes, Miss Crask," and as I always did. And so we were. There were only 4 dancers that had the money. That was Bunty Kelly, Maria Dare, Peter Saul, and me. And the rest of the people just couldn't. There was a lot of money for a dancer. It was a big, expensive trip because we flew from New York to Wilmington. It was Wilmington, North Carolina, and stayed, I don't know how long it was, down in Myrtle Beach. And then we flew from Myrtle Beach to Washington to Los Angeles. We took a trip to Marymount there, and then we flew to San Francisco, and Baba left the state from San Francisco, and then we had to fly back. So it was a lot of money. And we had to stay in hotels in Los Angeles and San Francisco and so forth. So and there were social functions, and most of them cost something. So we had all that stuff to deal with. But we had, those 4 dancers had it. And during our stay at Myrtle Beach, several things happened, but one of the things was early one morning, like before 7 o'clock, someone knocked, on the door of the cabin. In 1956 and 1958, Peter Saul and I were billeted with Don Stevens. It was a wonderful mixture. I mean, just made in heaven. Because Well, we were slightly different types. And those cabins were not huge. And Elizabeth was running the center, and there were a lot of rules. And Elizabeth knew every one of them and who was where, when. I mean, you didn't pick a blade of grass because there was an alarm bell, and it was Elizabeth. That what? You couldn't touch anything. I mean, the center was for Baba, and you're not to mess with it in any way. And also, lights out at 10 o'clock. Everybody, and lights out. They went out at 10 o'clock. So we would lie on our beds in different corners of the room. And I can tell this story about Don. And we would talk for some time. None of us went to bed at 10 o'clock, for God's sake. But so we talked, and solved a lot of problems. And one night, and I do not know how the subject arose, it certainly didn't come from me. But the question of reading God Speaks arose. And I can set one little thing straight, that when God Speak was published, the Pasufis published it, and I'm sure it was very, very expensive, and they spent a lot of money. And that book, by the way, was in the window of Doubleday's on Fifth Avenue and 52nd or 53rd Street, wherever it was. Imagine a spiritual book, God Speaks, in the window of Doubleday and Fifth Avenue. Maybe that doesn't strike you as strange, but this was 1950-something. It was very strange. And, okay. And so Don, of course, he had edited it, and this and that and the other. And Baba, but they couldn't sell. It didn't sell very well. Didn't make a lot of money, to say the least. So Baba said, buy a copy. He told all of us to buy a copy. So I bought a copy, but he did not tell us to read it. And that is not my bag anyway, for sure. But nowadays everybody said, oh, well, Baba ordered it. He didn't. He said we had to buy it, which I did. And it's a very strange thing. I have books from practically when I was a child, and I don't know what happened to that book. It has vanished somehow. But Brenner Mell passed away a few years ago, and he willed me his signed copy of Baba, and Katie was the only thing on earth that could move me. She put shame and fear. She looked at me. We were in Mandalay Hall. I was talking and this and that. And I don't know how or what. But, well, and Katie told the story that Baba told them, all of them, they had to read it. And he told her to read it. And she did. And Baba called her in and said, did you read it? And she said, yes, Baba. And he said, did you understand it? And she said, not one word. And Baba said, oh, go away. So, but she said, somehow I had to admit that I had not read it. This was like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, sometime, very soon, not very far, not distant past. And she looked at me and she said, you haven't read it? And I thought, oh my God, that was the only thing. So when I got back, I did read it. It only took me about 3 months. Yeah, I deserve it. And watch out, I'm ready to jump a couple of planes. Anyway, so that's that's a real distraction. Anyway, but in 1956 or 58, I've forgotten which, I think it was 56, I had not read it. Neither had Peter, of course. And we were there. And Don, he was talking this and that, and then he said, and you've read it, of course. And no answer. He said, well, you have read it. You know, in his dark corner, you have read it. And I said, no, Don, I have not read it. And Peter jumped in and he said, well, I haven't read it either. And there was this long pause. And Don Stevens said, well, I'll tell you what we can do. Oh, no. We can get up around 5:30 and we can read a chapter before breakfast every day. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to shoot myself. Because you're not allowed to offend people. And that was Don Stevens's baby. And the reason I had not read it, was because I didn't want to read it. And I said, how am I going to handle this? And then all of a sudden there was this inane, idiotic, slightly off balance giggle from Peter. And Don said, what's funny? And Peter said, well, I was just thinking that here we are, and Baba is asleep just across the lagoon, and we're going to get up and read a book. And that struck me as very funny. And I started laughing. I said, it is funny. I don't think Don ever got the message. It wasn't funny to Don. But anyway, okay. But also, okay. And then somebody early one morning, bang, bang, bang on the screen door. And I go to the door and they said, Baba wants to see you. Whoever it was, I forgot. Delia, I think it was. Anyway, she said, Baba wants to see you. I said, ooh. Again, I just froze. This is bad news. No way. And so I threw on my clothes and I walked towards the original kitchen. I saw that that's where Baba was, and he was sitting on the railing, that little cedar railing. And not by the kitchen, but he was sitting beyond it. That railing, the farm shed, those of you who know Myrtle Beach, the farm shed was not there. And he was close to the lagoon cabin, looking across that neck of the lagoon and towards that little hillock where the farm shed is now built. And it was really a very, very beautiful scenic view. But anyway, I got there and there was a line. I remember Phyllis Frederick was there, and all the important people were there. I didn't belong there at all. I mean, Ben Heyman was there, Ivy Deuce was there, Phyllis Frederick was there, and Ruth White was there. She was right in front of me, and Miss Crask she was guardian of Ruth White. Ruth White at that time was 101, I think. And Baba made something of a fuss over Ruth White. And I remember she was right in front of me because we were whispering with someone, I don't know. And I laughed. And Ruth White, turned around ferocious like a cobra and said, one does not laugh in the presence of the master. And I looked to Miss Crask for support, and boy, not a blink. you can digest that, young man. And okay, so I said, oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, so my turn finally came, and it was quite some time. And the first thing Baba did was said, sit down on the railing right next to him, to his right. So I sat down, and he said, just look at this text. Isn't this beautiful? And he was absolutely right, because the dew had not burnt off. It was like millions of diamonds were sprinkled all over. And there was this frame of foliage and practically meeting at the top and across the lagoon to that little hillock. It was really beautiful. And he said, I did a good job, didn't I? And because that's the way Baba, but remember that, please, that's the way Baba was. He wasn't serious and gruesome all the time. He was never gruesome. And anyhow, and I'm looking there, oh yes, Baba, and then he said, make the coat. Oh, and I nearly fell over, because I have to, I also, in 1952, I also made Baba a pair of sandals. Now, I was a reasonably accomplished tailor. I didn't know my ass from my elbow about cobbling, but I decided to make him sandals, and I did. And they were just awful. And there's a story there, because this happened to me. When Baba left in 1952, everybody was forbidden to go to the airport or anything like that. So I had made these sandals, and I called Miss Krask, and I told her my problem, that I had these sandals and I want to give them to Baba. I want Baba to have them, and so forth. And she said, well, I'll see what I can do. And she did. And she called me back, and she said, I can give them to Kitty or somebody. I don't want to see Baba. I don't want to break the rules. Just, get these sandals. And she said, well, I'll see what I can do. And she called back and said, if I didn't get smart and broke the rules, I could go to the airport and give them to Kitty. Okay. Well, Kennedy Airport at that time was called Idlewild, and it wasn't an airport at all. It was, do any of you remember what a Quonset hut was? Okay. Because I tell this story and people say, Quonset hut? What's a Quonset hut? Anyway, and there were two of them put together. Half barrels, and the ends were knocked out, and they were put together. And they were temporary buildings, and you walked in, and the tickets counters were on this side, and the waiting rooms were all on this side. All the way to the end. It must have been, maybe there was more than two Quonset hut anyway. It's quite long. And I looked down there, and very few people were there. And I walked the entire length of that, and I'm looking for Baba. For Kitty. And I couldn't find her, or anybody. And I walked all the way to the end, and I turned around, and I walked all the way back. And again, I really examined that place. There wasn't anybody there, maybe 5 people. And in different places. And I get to the end and look down again, and I see that over to my left at that time, there was a little kind of niche, a little room that, if you can believe it, in those days, it was still a time that people used to walk and watch planes leave, your friends, and you waved to them. It was that civilized. Can you believe it? So that's where you went, because you would go up to the roof of that little place, and you could see the planes take off. So I said, oh, Maybe they're in there. So I went charging down again. And again, I looked very, very carefully. And and suddenly I see this place and Kitty in the distance. And I started over there, and Kitty comes and she meets me, head on and stops me because I didn't know it. But Mayra was in there and she was still in seclusion. And anyway, I said, Kitty, I had these sandals, blah, 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 blah. Do you know about it? And she said, well, why don't you give it to them? Why don't you give them to him yourself? And she said, he's calling you. And I turned and looked over my shoulder, and Baba is sitting over there in a wheelchair with a grin that was really, and his eyes were dancing like crazy. And he was standing with Erich and Meherji and Adi and Nilu. And I had passed them 3 times. And when I tell you they weren't there, they weren't there. But anyway, he said, come, what are you doing? And I gave him the sandals, and he gave me a hug, which I had not expected. I wouldn't have gotten it, I'm sure, had I fished for it. But anyway, so that's the story. But I wasn't pleased with those sandals at all. So when the news came in 1956 that Baba was coming again and we would see him, I said, I'll correct that. I'll make him a good pair this time. And then I decided, really sometimes I wonder. I thought, well, I'll make him some evening slippers. So I got some beautiful, you could buy things in those days. They cost, but you could buy them. You could find things. And I bought this beautiful, soft suede, black suede. And I bought a beautiful, very thin, fine liner of red leather. So I cut out a pattern in the black suede and laid it over the red suede, and I was embroidering that design for these sandals. And of course, I hadn't finished them because that's a lot of work. Not only do you have to make the sun, I had to, cut them out and embroider. And they were kind of stunning, but stupid. Ooh, yeah. And I got halfway through those, and I said, what am I doing? Baba will never wear these. He doesn't go to the opera or anything like that. So I started another pair, and I hadn't finished them. And when Baba said to me, and I brought them with me down to Myrtle Beach, and I was going to finish them there. But when he said, make the coat, I said, oh, I'm not to finish the sandals? And Baba looked at me like, what sandals? And then the minute I said that, I knew I had made a mistake. But there I was stuck with it. So I tried to say, oh, it doesn't matter. He said, what sandals? And this is Erich, of course, but Baba... To me, Baba was never silent. I never heard his voice, but he never was silent. And all you had to do was look at him and you knew. and I said, well, I started these sandals and they're not finished in this, but it doesn't matter. And he took this very serious. And he looked at Erich like, shall I have him in and finish the sandals? He said, okay, finish the sandals. And I said, oh, yeah. So I was stuck. And of course, the strange thing is that when we were with Baba, we didn't have any time. We didn't have anything to do, but we had no time at all. And I can't explain that except that the way it was. And So I didn't have time to work on the sandals. So I would have to stay up all night in the original kitchen. And you use glue and you have to hammer the bubbles out. You don't want bubbles in your glue when you put the two pieces together. And I had this little toy hammer that I had, and I didn't think, I'm really stupid that sound travels very quickly over water. And there's water all the way around Myrtle Beach. Anyway, one morning I met Jean Shaw on the path, and she said, "We heard the fairy cobbler last night." So that was amazing. Anyway, I made those stupid sandals, and I finished them. And Baba told me, he said they had to be finished by a certain date, a certain day. And it was very near, I don't know how we were on down there 9 days or something like that. I don't remember. But anyway, I finished them. And I expected Baba to call me so I could give it to him. So I put them in my hip pocket. Well, that day passed, the day that I was supposed, and another, and he didn't pay any attention to it. And we went to Brook Green Gardens. Yes, oh yes. And that was the kind when it was kind of dangerous to be in the crowd. There were people like Billy Eaton with weapons she was determined and she won. If you look in the films, you will find Billy Eaton walking next to Bob. And she trampled old ladies and babies to get there. And I said to her once, I said, "Well, Billy, that's not very attractive behavior." And I won't tell you what she said, but that's how much it meant to her. But anyway, I said, "It's ridiculous to climb up, that bit." Here there are, I'm sure there are millions of people. Where is that? What is it? In the world that would give years of their lives just to be near Baba. So you're going to make a fuss about walking next to him if you're 10 feet away? I said, that's ridiculous. So I was always on the fringes. And Peter, I don't know, he came to the same conclusion, I guess. And we were always on the bringing up the rear or something like that. You could see Baba. There were not that many people. And but we go to Brook Green Gardens, which I found, I just found the sculpture there awful. But we won't go into that. But Baba went to each one because he was being guided by somebody. And then suddenly, everybody stops. We can't see Baba. I can't see Baba. And Peter and I are at the back, and everybody stopped. The whole crowd stops. And just, and all of a sudden, it opens up like that. The crowd opens up like that. And I have a clear view of Baba. He's sitting under a tree. And he says, "Come to me." And I came and he said, "Give me the sandals." And I gave him I had them with me. And he put them on and he tried to walk in them. But I cannot describe to you what that did to me. No, it's funny. It is funny. But it ain't so funny if you're on the end of it. I went into an immediate depression. And the nicest things the Sufi ever did for me was when they cut out in the film, when I saw the film of 1956 that Charmian took, there was a clip of him trying to walk in sandals. And the next time I saw it, the clip wasn't there. So I had to thank the Sufis for that. Because I went back and I didn't talk to any of my friends. And they said, oh, what's wrong with the text? But never mind. And we had dinner everybody ate in the original kitchen. That's how many people were there. So you can and I took mine there was a little tiny table in the corner, and I sat at that table looking at the corner. And I remember Ruth White came by. And how she knew, I don't know, but she said, oh, it's a symbol, and walked away. And I said, yeah, but I don't like the symbol very much. Anyway, so I finished them. Now, I had to start the coat, didn't I? Because Baba said, make the coat. I didn't have scissors. I didn't have fabric. I didn't have anything. And we were not allowed to leave the center. So I really did not like doing this. I had to do it 2 or 3 times, that going and asking Baba for something. And I asked permission if I could come. He was over at the guest house, and guest house was off limits. And I got to see him, and he was sitting on a couch I don't know the guest house because I've never been in it. And I don't know many men who have. But he was sitting there with Amandali and Ben Haman and Ivy Deuce and all those people looking on you completely disapprovingly all the time. And I said, you know, Baba, I don't have this and that and the other. Can I go into Myrtle Beach and buy some fabric and so I can start the coat? And he went into this. And he really pondered this. And he finally said, we'll flip a coin. So I started looking for a coin, forgetting that Baba didn't touch money. But someone gave him a bottle cap. Anyway, he flipped the bottle cap, and it was heads, which was me. And he said, okay, you can go. He played this game. But anyway, sorry. So I went to Myrtle Beach. There wasn't one strand of wool in all of Myrtle Beach. It was all cotton, cotton, cotton. I had never seen Baba in a cotton coat. And not only that, it was summer cotton. But I bought a yardage, and I bought scissors, and I bought thimbles and thread and this and that and the other. It was a shade of blue. But I didn't like it at all. And I didn't get started on it. And I had no time again. I would have had to stay up all night to do it anyhow. And but then so we have to leave Myrtle Beach, and we go to Washington, spend a day, and we go to Los Angeles and spend several days. And there's a story there of when we had a dinner at the Garden of Allah and things like that. And time passes, and I haven't started this coat. Ridiculous, I had not started this coat. And then finally, we go to San Francisco for 4 or 5 days. And Baba was going to leave from San Francisco. And the day we arrived about noon. And Baba said, you can have the afternoon off. You can go into the city, you can do anything you want to do. And oh boy. So I went to the desk at Holiday Lodge, and I said, what's the best fabric store in San Francisco? And they told me that. I went there, and sure enough, there were beautiful fabrics there. And I bought a beautiful yardage of English flannel wool, sky blue, the most beautiful shade of blue, delicate, delicate, and I went and I asked them where the notion store was and things like that. And I bought silk thread. I said, this is for Baba. He deserves silk. And mind you, all of it's going to have to be made by hand, the whole thing. And what I didn't take into account was silk thread knots like crazy. Much more, it's like wire. It's not like thread at all. And when you pull it through, and it curls up and knots. And so I cut this coat, and every stitch was back stitched. And I made French seams. I mean, flat fell seams, not French seams, but flat fell seams. Well, a flat fell, I don't know those of you who sew or not, but anyway, you sew the fabric together, then you fold over, you trim it, and you fold it over 1/4 of an inch and fold that over, and then you stitch along the edge of the fabric you folded over, and then a decorative stitch next. Anyway, 3 times, same seam 3 times, back stitch, silk, not, and you can't wax it because that takes the sheen off of it. So what's the point of using silk if you take the sheen off? So anyway, I made it. And I made bound buttonholes, which are not worked buttonholes, but anyway, that's a bound buttonhole. You have to, it's kind of tricky. It's a lot of work. 7 of them down the front. And I made this, and again, I had no time. I stayed up night after night after night, just sewing. And then halfway through, Baba got into the habit of stopping in the middle of a discourse, some serious discourse, you know. It wasn't infinite intelligence, but it was almost as bad. And he would say, Tex, have you finished the code? And always the answer was, no, Baba, but he said, oh, okay. And then he finally said, yeah, I see. I'm going to be I'm flying off and you're running behind waving that coat, right? And I said, I'll finish it. I promise I'll finish it. I didn't know anything. I didn't know that when Baba said you were to do something, you were to do it that instant. You didn't have to maybe do it yesterday because that's, you know, I didn't know those things. I kept putting it off. And anyway, the day before he was leaving America, I had not finished that coat. And I did finish it about 5 o'clock in the morning, but I didn't have time to put pockets on it. And it was I saw that coat eventually. I saw it again a few years ago. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't do it now. Baba must have done it. Those stitches are straighter on those seams than I could do on a machine now. They're incredible. I didn't do those. He must have done them. I thought I did. I lost the sleep, but he did the stitches. Anyway, I did finish, and we were not allowed to go near Baba's room when he retired, which was at 6 o'clock in the evening. So I had to ask permission again, asking for things. I said, Baba, is all right if I just wrap it in tissue paper and I'll lay it on your doorstep? Because the Holiday Lodge was not just rooms, it was kind of like a motel. There were rooms and there were walls of those cedar sticks in between, those cedar fences in between each room. So there was a doorstep to his room. So at 5 o'clock, I ran over there and I dropped it and I ran back. I didn't want to be inside that place. And I think, I was so tired. You cannot imagine it. And I was just about ready to lie down when there was a knock on my door. And it was Adi. And he said, Baba wants to see you. So I threw on some clothes and I ran, and I really ran over there. And I turned the corner, and the opening to the little fence, the little yard, was in line with Baba's door. And his door was open, and I turned the corner, and Baba was standing in the middle of the room in that coat. And his eyes were twinkling like crazy. And he said, don't I look handsome? As sweet as anything. And then he started joking with me. I don't remember, but he ridiculing me, quite justifiably. Okay, who can't be ridiculed? Whom do you know that can't be ridiculed? So, but with Baba, it was very, very different. So that's the story of the coat, and I did pretty well. It is now the property of the Archives Committee.
Did you measure Baba?
No, there's a story of Jean Shaw, was a very, very kind of very extra sweet lady. But anyway, I got as far as the sleeves. I was not worried about the body of the coat because I thought that'd be okay. It was a drape. And but I didn't know the length of the sleeves. And I was sitting there sewing inside my little, my little yard, and the dancers were all there. We were all hanging out, and I was telling Kitty, I said, do you know how long Baba's arms are? And of course, Kitty, blah, 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 I don't know what she was saying. And all of a sudden, this voice came over the fence and said, I know. And I thought, who's eavesdropping? But it was Jean Shaw. And as it happened, Jean Shaw did Baba's ironing. Adele did the washing, and Jean Shaw did the ironing. I said to her, oh, you know? And she said, yes, I know. And I said, how do you know? And she said, well, I do the ironing. And I thought to myself, well, this doesn't sound very good to me, but I don't know. So I said, how long is his arm? And she took it, and she took the inseam, and she went, there. And when I tell you, it was absolutely perfect. So that's one of them anyway. Jai Baba.